They seated me by the restrooms, table 32, my own daughter's wedding, and they hid me behind a fake palm tree like I was some dirty secret. My son-in-law said I was too poor to belong. They thought I was just an old, broken carpenter. They forgot I built the foundation they stood on, and I was about to tear it all down. My name is Arthur Harrison. I'm a builder. Or at least I was. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. It helps to know I'm not alone in this world. It really does. The ballroom was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto marble floors, so polished they looked wet. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and thousands of white roses. It was the kind of place that made my boots feel too heavy, my hands too rough, the kind of place I didn't belong. This was my daughter Emily's wedding day, a day I'd dreamed of since the moment she was born, and I felt like an intruder. I tugged at the collar of my suit. It was the only one I owned. I bought it 15 years ago when I buried Mary, my wife. It smelled faintly of mothballs and a sadness that never quite faded. The fabric was stiff, cheap polyester scratching against my neck. It was tight around the shoulders, a constant reminder that I was older, stiffer, and apparently obsolete. I scanned the room. My heart ached with a strange, bitter mix of pride and profound loneliness. I saw Emily. She was breathtaking. A princess. Her dress, a shimmering cascade of lace and pearls, probably cost more than my old Ford pickup was worth. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her hand resting lightly on the arm of her new husband, Michael. They looked perfect, like a magazine cover. But perfection, I was learning, is often just a very expensive mask. Michael was everything I wasn't. Polished, sharp, and effortlessly wealthy. He wore his success like that custom tuxedo, tailored and flawless. He was a tech entrepreneur. He and my son David had started a company 2 years ago. It was some kind of app, something about algorithms and data mining. I didn't really understand the tech, but I understood the result. The company had exploded overnight. Suddenly they were rich, millionaires. And just as suddenly, I had become the embarrassing past they needed to hide, the rough draft they wanted to forget. The changes were subtle at first. A slow erosion. Emily stopped suggesting we meet at the old diner we loved, the one with the sticky booths and the best apple pie in the city. Instead, it was restaurants where the appetizers cost more than my weekly grocery bill. I'd sit there feeling the weight of the heavy silverware, afraid to spill something on the white tablecloth, afraid to be myself. David stopped calling to ask for advice. He used to call about everything: car trouble, life decisions. Now, brief, distracted texts. Busy, Dad. In a meeting. Talk later. Later never came. They were busy. They were important. And I was just the old man who smelled like sawdust. I tried to be happy for them. I really did. This was what Mary and I had worked for, wasn't it? To give our children a better life. An easier life. We spent decades breaking our backs so they wouldn't have to, but I never thought that better life wouldn't include me. I never thought I'd be an outsider in the world I helped them build. I walked toward the seating chart. It was a massive mirror framed in gold, with names written in swirling, elegant script. It looked intimidating, like a list of who mattered. I ran my finger down the list, searching for my name. Harrison, Arthur. Table 1? No. That was Michael's parents and the wedding party. Table 5? No. That was David and some important-looking men in shiny shoes. I went further down. Table 10. My stomach started to twist. The realization was dawning on me, slow and cold. They didn't forget me. They remembered exactly where to put me. Finally, I found it, at the very bottom, the last name on the list. Table 32. A young woman with a headset and a clipboard approached me, the wedding planner. Her name tag read Jessica. She wore a tight black dress and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Harrison, follow me, please. Her tone was brisk, dismissive, like she was taking out the trash. I followed her. We walked away from the magnificent head table, away from the light and the music. We passed the inner circle of tables. I saw David laughing loudly, slapping the back of an older man in an expensive suit. He looked right through me like I wasn't even there. We kept walking. The beautiful music started to fade, replaced by a different kind of noise. The clatter of dishes, the sharp shouts of kitchen staff, the rhythmic whoosh of heavy doors. We reached the very edge of the ballroom, a dim corner, partially hidden by a large artificial palm tree. It looked dusty, forgotten. Jessica stopped at a small, round table. It was draped in a tablecloth that seemed slightly shorter than the others. It had no centerpiece, no flowers, no candles. Just two chairs. Table 32, she said quickly. I stared at the placement. It was right next to a hallway. A sign above the hallway glowed red. Restrooms. On the other side of the table were the swinging doors to the kitchen. It was intentional. It was a statement, a message loud and clear. You don't belong here, Dad. Is this right? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. The humiliation was already creeping up my neck, hot and prickly. The seating chart is very specific, sir, Jessica said, already backing away. It was approved by the groom. Approved by the groom. Michael. She disappeared back into the crowd, leaving me standing alone in the shadows. I looked at the table. The constant traffic to the restrooms was loud. Every time someone went in or out, a gust of stale, overly sanitized air washed over me. The smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with the aroma of roasted chicken from the kitchen. It was nauseating. I sat down heavily. The chair wobbled slightly. I was completely isolated. They hadn't even bothered to seat me with distant cousins or old neighbors. People I might know, people who might share a memory of the Emily I knew. They had put me in the dark, by the toilets, alone. I watched the reception begin, from my vantage point. I felt like a ghost haunting my own memories. The lights dimmed. The music swelled. Emily and Michael took the floor for their first dance. They looked beautiful, happy, but the image felt hollow, false. A voice interrupted my thoughts.
Arthur, is that you hiding back here?
I looked up. It was Clara, Mary's sister, my sister-in-law. She looked older, her face lined with the same grief I carried. But she was dressed nicely, trying to fit in. Clara, I said, standing up to hug her. It's good to see you. You too, Arthur. She looked at the table, then at the restroom sign. Her expression tightened. What are they doing, putting you back here? This is ridiculous. Michael approved it, I said, the words tasting like ash. Clara shook her head, her eyes filled with anger. That boy, he has no respect. No decency. Mary would be ashamed of Emily right now. She sat down in the other chair. I'm at table 28. Not much better. But at least I have company. Why are you alone? I guess I didn't make the cut, I said, trying to sound light. But my voice cracked. Clara reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her hand was warm, comforting. Don't let them get to you, Arthur. You're a good man. You deserve better than this. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the party unfold. But the comfort was short-lived. Clara glanced nervously toward the main room. I should get back, she whispered. Michael's parents are at my table. I don't want to seem rude. She squeezed my hand again and disappeared back into the crowd. Even Clara knew the truth, was afraid of their judgment. I was truly alone. I watched David across the room. He was performing, shaking hands, smiling too brightly. He was playing the part of the successful entrepreneur, the man who had made it. I needed an answer. I needed to hear him say it. I stood up and walked toward the bar, where he was heading. I intercepted him near a large ice sculpture, a swan, melting slowly under the hot lights. David, I said. He stopped, clearly annoyed. His eyes flickered over me, cold and distant. Dad, what is it? I'm busy. Busy, I repeated. David, I'm sitting by the restrooms. Why? David looked uncomfortable. He glanced around, making sure no one important was listening. His eyes darted to a group of investors near the champagne fountain. One of them, a distinguished-looking man I recognized from the newspapers as Mr. Henderson, a major player in the tech world, was watching us. Look, Dad, David whispered, leaning in close. This wedding isn't just a party. It's important for Michael, for us. It's a networking event. We have to project the right image. A networking event? I echoed. It's your sister's wedding. I'm your father. He looked at my suit, his expression filled with disdain. And frankly, Dad, you don't exactly fit in. You look like you just came from a construction site. The words stung. My own son. The boy I taught to swing a hammer. The boy I held when he cried over his mother's death. Fit in, David? I raised you. I worked my whole life for you. I put a roof over your head. I know, Dad, and we appreciate it, he said. The words empty, rehearsed. But this is different. This is the big leagues. This isn't one of your small-time jobs. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Now please, go back to your seat. You're drawing attention. You're embarrassing me in front of Henderson. He walked away, just like that, leaving me standing there, trembling. A mixture of rage and heartbreak burned in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I walked back to my corner, my vision blurred by tears. I stumbled slightly, bumping into a waiter. Watch it, old man. The waiter snapped. I mumbled an apology and kept walking. I was invisible until I was in the way. I sat down at table 32. The smell of disinfectant seemed stronger now. The laughter from the ballroom sounded cruel, mocking. I thought I had reached the bottom. I was wrong. The humiliation wasn't over yet. Then I saw Michael striding towards me. The groom. He moved with the easy arrogance of someone who had never known struggle, never had a sleepless night, worrying about bills. He stopped at my table, looking down at me, a mixture of pity and annoyance, a smirk playing on his lips. Maybe he realized how cruel this was. Maybe he was coming to move me. Maybe there was some humanity left in him. Arthur, he said. His voice was smooth as polished stone, but just as cold. I see you found your seat. Comfortable. I stood up. I had to say something. I had to maintain some shred of dignity, even if it was the last thing I had left. Michael, I replied, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. I don't understand. Why am I sitting back here? Why am I hidden away? I'm Emily's father. Michael glanced around quickly, his eyes darting around the room, making sure no one important was listening. He leaned in close. His breath was hot, smelling of expensive champagne. He lowered his voice to a vicious whisper. Look, Arthur, let's be realistic, he hissed. The word realistic dripped with contempt. This wedding isn't just about Emily. It's about image. My investors are here. My clients are here. These are important people. He paused. He gestured dismissively at my old suit. The suit I wore to bury Mary. We can't sit you next to them. You're too poor, he whispered. The cruelty was unmistakable. You simply don't fit the brand. The brand? I choked out. Yes, Arthur. The brand. Our image. It's embarrassing for Emily. And frankly, it's bad for business. He straightened his tie, the smirk returning to his face. You look like the help. The words hit me like a physical blow. Too poor, bad for business. The help? I thought about the years I'd worked double shifts. The weekends I'd spent framing houses instead of playing catch with David. The retirement savings I drained when Mary got set. Every dime I had went into raising them, educating them, giving them the start in life I never had. And I thought about the house. My house, the one I had built for Mary, the one I had mortgaged 2 years ago, to give them the seed money for their precious startup, when no one else would invest in them, when the banks laughed at them. I believed in them. I risked everything for them. And now I was an embarrassment, a liability, a bad investment. A bad investment. I invested in you, I managed to say. The words were thick in my throat. I gave you that start. Michael scoffed, a cruel, sharp sound. You gave us a loan, Arthur, a small one, pocket change. It was everything I had, I whispered. The admission felt like a confession, a failure, and we appreciate the charity, he retorted, his lip curling in disgust. But don't confuse that with belonging here. This is my world now, not yours. Charity, my life savings, my home. Charity. He looked at me one last time, his eyes cold and dismissive. Now sit down, Arthur. Don't make a scene at my wedding. Enjoy the free meal. He turned sharply and walked away, gliding back into the crowd as if I didn't exist, as if I was nothing. I sank back into the wobbly chair at table 32. I couldn't breathe. The joyous music seemed mocking now. The laughter sounded cruel. I looked across the room and caught Emily's eye. My daughter, she was watching me. For a fleeting second, I saw something. A flash of guilt. A flicker of the little girl who used to run to me when she scraped her knee. The little girl I used to comfort. But then Michael returned to her side. He whispered something in her ear, and she turned away, masking her face with a bright, empty smile. She chose him. She chose this life. The rejection stung worse than anything. Michael had said, "This was my daughter, my blood," and she had abandoned me. The betrayal was complete. I sat there for a long time, numb. The world faded around me. I thought of Mary. Integrity. Arthur, she used to say. Her voice was so clear in my mind. That's the only wealth that truly matters. I had tried to instill that in Emily and David. I tried to teach them the value of hard work, honesty, loyalty. But the lure of easy money, the intoxicating smell of success, had poisoned them. It had rotted them from the inside out. The waiters began serving the first course. A small, delicate salad was placed in front of me. Expensive greens, goat cheese, things I couldn't pronounce. I stared at it, unable to eat. The food felt like ash in my mouth. Another waiter rushed past. This one was younger. He looked tired. His name tag read James. He noticed my untouched plate. "Is everything all right, sir?" James asked, his voice kind, a stark contrast to the hostility I'd faced all evening. "Yes, thank you," I mumbled, surprised by the kindness. James hesitated. He glanced at the head table, then back at me. "It's a rough crowd tonight. You have no idea," I agreed, the words hollow. "You look like you could use a real drink," James said, a slight smile on his face. "I'll see what I can do." He disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, he returned with a glass of whiskey. "On the house?" he whispered, winking. I thanked him, the warmth of the whiskey spreading through my chest. A small act of kindness in a sea of cruelty. It reminded me that decency still existed in the world, but it wasn't enough to erase the pain. I was contemplating just leaving, slipping out the back, driving my rusty truck home to my empty, mortgaged house, and trying to forget the sound of my children's laughter. Trying to forget I ever had children. That's when a shadow fell over my table. I looked up, expecting James coming to clear my plate. Instead, I saw a man standing there. He was older than me, maybe late 60s, but he carried himself with an undeniable aura of power. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, crisp and elegant. It wasn't flashy, but the way it fit him screamed quality, screamed money. Real money. His hair was silver. His eyes were a sharp, intelligent blue. They seemed to take in everything at once. He looked at the location of the table, the restroom sign, the kitchen doors, and then back at me. A flicker of understanding crossed his face. Maybe even sympathy. "Rough spot they gave you," he said. His voice was smooth and deep, calm. I tensed, embarrassed, humiliated all over again. "I think you have the wrong table, sir," I said politely. "This area is secluded, and the service is terrible." I tried to make a joke. It fell flat. The man smiled faintly. "I know exactly where I am. Arthur Harrison." I blinked, surprised he knew my name. I didn't recognize him at all. Who was this man? He pulled out the other chair at my table and sat down. He didn't seem bothered by the noise or the location. He just watched me. A curious, intelligent gaze. "It's noisy everywhere tonight," he said, "but the view from the back is often the most revealing." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "My name is Robert Vance." The name hit me like a bolt of lightning. Robert Vance. He was a legend, the CEO of Apex Global Investments, one of the largest and most powerful investment firms in the country. I'd read about him in the newspapers. He was a shark, a kingmaker, a billionaire. What was he doing here? And more importantly, what was he doing at my table? "Next to the restrooms?" "Mr. Vance," I stammered, completely bewildered. "It's an honor, but I don't understand why you're sitting here." "With me?" Robert raised a hand, silencing me gently. He signaled a waiter. James rushed over immediately. Suddenly attentive, suddenly respectful. Bring me a glass of your best scotch. Neat, Robert ordered. James nodded nervously. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. He dashed off. Robert turned back to me, a strange twinkle in his eyes. Arthur, he said, his voice low and calm, let's pretend we're old friends. It might make the evening more interesting. Old friends, I repeated, still confused. I didn't have friends like Robert Vance. Yes, talk to me. Tell me about your work. I understand you're a builder. I hesitated. Why would this man, this titan of industry, want to talk to me about carpentry? But there was something compelling in his gaze, sincerity, genuine interest. I started talking. I told him about the satisfaction of building something with my own hands, the smell of fresh-cut cedar, the precision of a perfectly joined corner. I told him about the house I built for Mary, the way the morning light hit the kitchen just right, the way she used to smile when she saw it. He listened intently, nodding occasionally, asking insightful questions. He seemed genuinely interested. He understood the craft. He understood the value of hard work. Craftsmanship, Robert said, swirling the scotch James had hastily delivered. It's a dying art. Everyone wants things fast and cheap these days. They don't understand the value of a solid foundation. He looked around the opulent ballroom, a hint of disdain in his eyes. This, he gestured, is all facade, flash. But a house built with care that lasts, that endures. As we talked, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere around our table. The whispers nearby stopped. People were staring, not at me, the poor father in the cheap suit, but at the man sitting with me. The realization of who he was rippled through the room, like a stone dropped in water. The hotel manager came out of the kitchen, looked at Robert, his face turned pale. He quickly whispered something to the waiters. Suddenly, the service at our table changed. We were treated like royalty. A centerpiece appeared out of nowhere, a beautiful arrangement of white roses, the same ones that were on the head table. I glanced across the ballroom toward David. When my son saw us together, his face turned white. He looked like he had seen a ghost. He nudged Michael, his movements jerky and panicked. Michael turned, his arrogant smirk faltered, replaced by sheer terror. Robert Vance wasn't just attending the wedding. He was the reason for the wedding's opulence. I remembered David boasting a few weeks ago. Apex Global had just finalized the acquisition of their startup. For an astronomical sum, Michael and David were rich because of this man. The deal was closing on Monday, and this man, this powerful man, was sitting with me. By the restrooms, talking about carpentry. Why are you doing this, Mr. Vance? I asked. My voice trembled slightly. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew it was important. Robert sighed, a sound filled with a surprising weariness. Because, Arthur, I have a very low tolerance for disrespect, and I have an even lower tolerance for greed. He paused, looking directly into my eyes. His gaze was intense, unwavering.
Tell me about the agreement you signed.
2 years ago, Robert said. His voice hardened. The one where you gave your children the seed money for their company. My stomach tightened. The memory of that day was still raw. David and Michael had come to me, desperate, excited, full of hope. They had this brilliant idea, they said. But no bank would touch them. They needed capital, $100,000. I didn't have that kind of money. Not after Mary's medical bills. Not after years of struggling to make ends meet. But I had the house. It was paid off. It was my security, my retirement, my legacy. I took out a mortgage, I said quietly. The shame washed over me again. Admitting it out loud felt like a failure. I gave them everything I had. I risked everything. And in return, Robert prompted gently, they promised me a share, 25%. They said I was their founding investor, their partner. I remembered the excitement in their eyes. The gratitude. They wrote it down, signed a contract. They said they'd take care of me when they made it big. I remembered David's words, his promise. Dad, we're going to pay off the mortgage and then some. You won't have to worry about anything ever again. You deserve it. I believed him. I trusted him. He was my son. But they didn't, did they? Robert asked. His voice was laced with a cold fury that surprised me. He seemed angry on my behalf. I shook my head, staring down at my calloused hands, the hands that had built their dreams. When the company took off, they said the paperwork was complicated. They said the venture capitalists who invested later insisted on restructuring the ownership. They said my original contract was void. I continued. My voice cracked. They said it didn't matter anymore, that I didn't understand the business. And did they pay back the loan? Robert asked. They gave me a few $1,000s, enough to cover the mortgage payments for a while, but they never gave me the share. They told me I should be grateful they were paying me anything at all, that I was lucky. Grateful for being robbed of my life savings. My home. Robert nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on Michael and David across the room. They were watching us, fear radiating off them. They lied to you, Arthur, Robert said, his voice clear and cold. They deliberately defrauded you. The words hung in the air between us. Defrauded. It sounded so harsh, so criminal. But it was the truth. My own children had stolen from me. They had stolen my legacy, my security, my future, and my dignity. How do you know all this? I asked, a cold dread creeping up my spine. How did he know the intimate details of my betrayal? When Apex acquires a company, we do our due diligence. We look into everything, the financials, the contracts, the history. We look for rate in the foundation. He paused. We found the original agreement, Arthur, the one you signed. They thought they had buried it, but they were sloppy. Arrogant, they didn't cover their tracks. I felt a sudden surge of hope, quickly followed by doubt. But they said it was void, that it didn't matter anymore, that the lawyers had changed everything. Robert smiled, a cold, sharp smile that didn't reach his eyes. They were hoping you'd believe that. They were hoping you were just a simple old man who wouldn't fight back, who wouldn't understand. They underestimated you. But the original agreement was binding, Robert continued, and it contained a very specific clause, a clause they overlooked, a morality clause. A morality clause. I frowned, trying to remember. I remembered signing the document, but David had rushed me through it, saying it was just standard boilerplate. The legal jargon was confusing. I trusted them. Yes, it's a standard clause in many investment agreements, though often overlooked. It states that if the partners engage in any unethical, fraudulent, or deeply disreputable behavior that damages the company's standing, their ownership can be challenged and potentially revoked. He leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower, in defrauding the primary investor, their own father, and then publicly humiliating him at a family event. Well, that certainly qualifies as deeply disreputable and fraudulent behavior. The implication of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. The air rushed out of my lungs. What does that mean? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It means, Arthur, Robert said, that their ownership of the company is now in serious jeopardy. And the acquisition deal, the deal that was supposed to close on Monday, it's currently on hold. The ground shifted beneath me. They hadn't just humiliated me. They had ruined themselves. If this story has your heart racing, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Every click helps us keep uncovering stories that deserve to be heard. Because sometimes the truth needs a spotlight. Across the room, David was trying to approach our table. His face was slick with sweat. He hoped panicked, desperate. He was intercepted by one of Robert's security detail, a discreet man in a dark suit who had appeared out of nowhere, silent and imposing. Mr. Vance, David stammered, trying to peer around the security guard. His voice was high and tight. I apologize for the seating arrangement. There must have been a terrible mistake. A mix-up with the planner. Please, join us at the head table, David pleaded. We were just about to celebrate the acquisition. We want you to be part of it. Robert didn't even look at him. He just raised his hand in a dismissive gesture. I'm perfectly comfortable here, David. I'm catching up with my old friend, Arthur. We were just discussing the finer points of foundational integrity. David hesitated, his eyes darting between me and Robert. The fear in his eyes was palpable. He knew everything was unraveling. He retreated, pulling Michael into a hurried, whispered conversation. Emily joined them, her face etched with confusion and fear. The perfect facade was cracking. I saw Mr. Henderson, the investor David had been so desperate to impress, watching them. His expression was cold, judgmental. He whispered something to the man next to him and shook his head. They thought they were smart, Robert continued, his voice calm and measured. They thought they could bury the past. They thought they could erase you. But they underestimated you, Arthur, and they certainly underestimated me. Why do you care? I asked, still struggling to process what was happening. Why help me? I'm nobody. I'm just an old carpenter. Robert looked at me, his expression softening slightly. Because I started out just like you. My father was a mechanic. He worked himself to the bone to put me through college. I saw how the world treated him, how people looked down on him because he had grease under his fingernails. I never forgot that. He paused, the memory clouding his eyes. He died penniless, betrayed by a business partner he trusted, a man he considered family. I watched that happen, and I swore I would never let it happen to anyone else if I could prevent it. Puthata. He looked back at the head table. His gaze hardened again. And, besides, I don't like doing business with people who betray their own family. It shows a lack of character, a lack of integrity, and, in business, character is everything. The weight of the past 2 years, the humiliation, the isolation, the constant worry about the mortgage, the sleepless nights, it suddenly crashed down on me. I realized the depth of my children's betrayal. It wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was calculated theft. It was cruel. Just then, Emily approached the table. Her makeup was slightly smudged. Her smile strained. She looked beautiful, but the beauty seemed brittle now, fragile, like thin ice. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. She wouldn't look me in the eye. "I'm so sorry about the table. It was a mix-up. Michael is furious with the planner." She was lying. I could see it in the way her eyes darted nervously toward Robert. The realization pierced my heart deeper than any knife. My own daughter, my little girl, was trying to manipulate me, trying to protect her new life, even at my expense, emboldened by Robert's presence and by the truth. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time that evening. I saw the stranger she had become. "Save it, Emily." My voice was surprisingly steady, stronger than I expected. "I know the truth. I know about the contract. I know what you did." Emily recoiled as if I had struck her. Her face paled. She looked at Robert, her eyes wide with terror. "Please, Mr. Vance," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Don't let this ruin my wedding. It's my special day. We can fix this. We can pay him back, whatever he wants. Please." "I'm not ruining anything, Emily," Robert replied gently. But his eyes were cold, unyielding. "I'm simply correcting a mistake. A very expensive mistake." "Your mistake?" Emily backed away, tears welling in her eyes. She hurried back to Michael and David. The three of them were huddled together, their argument growing louder and more desperate. The guests nearby started whispering, sensing the drama unfolding. The spectacle they had tried so hard to avoid. "Why is he talking to your father?" Michael hissed at David, his voice sharp with panic. "We need him. The deal closes on Monday. We need that money. We need this acquisition." "I don't know," David retorted, his voice cracking. "He knows about the original contract. He knows everything. We're ruined." Their fragile alliance, built on greed and ambition, was fracturing before my eyes. They were turning on each other, like rats in a trap. "What happens now?" I asked Robert. "Now," Robert said, smoothing his napkin on his lap, "we let the truth come out. We let them face the consequences of their actions." We sat there in silence for a few minutes, the tension in the room growing thicker, suffocating. The music had stopped. The string quartet sat awkwardly, unsure whether to play or not. The guests were watching the drama unfold with morbid curiosity. The glittering wedding had turned into a public execution. Finally, Robert stood up. He picked up his champagne glass and tapped it lightly with a spoon. The sound, though quiet, echoed through the silent ballroom. Tink, tink. Everyone turned to look at him. The room recognized power, recognized authority. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert began, his voice clear and commanding, carrying across the vast space. I apologize for the interruption. I would like to propose a toast. Michael and Emily looked relieved. They stepped forward, their smiles plastered back on their faces, ready to accept the accolades, ready for the celebration to resume. David hung back, looking like he was about to be sick. To the bride and groom, Robert said, raising his glass. May your future be as honest and transparent as your business dealings. The subtle jab hit its mark. Michael flinched, his smile faltering, a flicker of fear in his eyes. The room felt the shift in tone. But tonight, Robert continued, turning toward me. His gaze swept across the room, drawing every eye to my table. To me, I must also recognize the man who made this all possible. The silent investor, the true visionary behind the company that Apex Global is so interested in acquiring. He gestured toward me. Mr. Arthur Harrison. A wave of confused murmurs washed over the room. Who was Arthur Harrison? The old man sitting next to the restroom. The man in the cheap suit. You see, Robert said, his voice cutting through the confusion. 2 years ago, Arthur Harrison risked everything he had. He mortgaged his home, the home he built with his own hands, to invest in his children's dream. He provided the seed money for their company. He is the foundational investor. Michael stepped forward, his face red with rage and desperation. That's not entirely accurate, Mr. Vance. His voice was loud, too loud. Arthur provided a small loan, which has been repaid. He has no stake in the company. He's just a retired carpenter. He spat the word carpenter like an insult. Mr. Henderson, the investor near the champagne fountain, frowned. He looked disgusted. The facade Michael had built was crumbling fast. Is that so? Robert replied, raising an eyebrow. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. The room seemed to hold its breath. The silence was absolute. Because this agreement, Robert announced, holding the paper aloft. It looked old, worn, but the signatures were clear, signed by you, Michael, by David Harrison, and by Arthur Harrison, states that Arthur is entitled to 25% of the company. David looked like he was going to faint. He grabbed the edge of a table to steady himself. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish, gasping for air. Furthermore, Robert continued, his voice ringing with authority, this agreement contains a morality clause, a clause that stipulates that if the partners engage in fraudulent behavior, their ownership is subject to revocation. He paused, letting the words sink in. He looked at Michael and David, his gaze ruthless, unforgiving. And defrauding your own father, Robert said, his voice dripping with contempt, lying to him, stealing his investment, and then treating him with such appalling disrespect. Well, that certainly qualifies. The room erupted in gasps. The glittering facade of the perfect wedding shattered into a million pieces. The wealthy guests, the investors Michael had been so desperate to impress, looked on with shock and disdain. The image he had tried so hard to project was destroyed. Therefore, Robert announced, his voice booming, Apex Global will not be proceeding with the acquisition under the current ownership structure. The fraudulent behavior of Mr. Michael and Mr. David Harrison has rendered the deal null and void. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stared at Robert, his face ashen. Null and void. You can't do that. We had a deal. We had a contract. We had a deal with a company we believed was operating ethically. Robert replied calmly. We do not do business with thieves, with liars. He looked at Michael with cold finality. Your employment prospects in this industry, I assure you, are now non-existent. You are toxic. David crumbled. He fell to his knees, sobbing, loud, racking sobs. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Michael said, we had to do it. He said it was the only way to secure the funding. I didn't want to. He looked up at me. his eyes pleading for forgiveness. But the words were empty, hollow. They were the words of a desperate man caught in a lie, not the words of a remorseful son. Emily burst into tears, loud, hysterical sobs that echoed through the silent ballroom. Her perfect wedding day, her perfect life, ruined. She looked at me, her eyes wide with horror, with accusation. "Dad, how could you do this to me?" she screamed. "How could I do this to her?" The narcissism, the entitlement, was breathtaking. She still didn't understand. She still thought she was the victim. I looked at my children. My heart ached with a profound sadness, a deep, unending grief. I had given them everything, and in return, they had thrown me away like garbage. I stood up. My legs trembled slightly, but I felt strong, clear, for the first time in years. I looked at Robert. "Thank you," I whispered, the words inadequate to express the depth of my gratitude. He hadn't just saved my finances. He had saved my dignity. Robert nodded. "It was my pleasure, Arthur. Justice needed to be served." We walked out of the ballroom together. The guests parted before us, their eyes filled with a mixture of shock, awe, and pity. As we reached the exit, I paused and looked back one last time. Michael was arguing furiously with his parents. His mother was crying. David was still on his knees. Alone, Emily was surrounded by her bridesmaids, her face buried in her hands. The glittering ballroom looked like a battlefield. I felt no joy in their downfall, no sense of victory, just an overwhelming sense of loss. The loss of the family I thought I had, the loss of the children I loved. We stepped out into the cool night air. It felt clean, fresh. The valet rushed to bring Robert's car, a sleek black sedan.
What happens now, Arthur?
Robert asked, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "The contract," I said. My voice tired. "The morality clause. Does it mean—" "It means," Robert explained gently, "that you have grounds to sue them for the entirety of their shares. Given the evidence, the contract they signed, the fraud they committed, you will win. You will own the company, Arthur, and if you still wish to sell it," Robert continued, "Apex Global is prepared to offer you the full acquisition price. You will be a very wealthy man." I took a deep breath, the fresh air filling my lungs. I thought about the money, the millions of dollars. It meant nothing to me. It was the currency that had poisoned my children, the disease that had destroyed my family. "I don't want the money, Robert," I said quietly. "I just wanted my children." Robert looked at me, a flicker of sadness in his eyes. He understood. "I know, Arthur. But they lost something far more valuable than money today. They lost their integrity. They lost their father." He opened the car door. "My lawyer, Thomas, will be in touch tomorrow. He'll handle everything." He offered me a ride, but I refused. I wanted to walk. I needed to clear my head. I turned and walked away from the opulent hotel, from the glittering lights, from the glittering lights, from the wreckage of my family. I walked toward my old pickup truck, parked down the street. It looked rusty, old, but it was mine, and it was honest. As I drove home, the silence of the empty house welcomed me like an old friend. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one Mary used to love, and closed my eyes. I slept better that night than I had in years. The next few months were a blur of legal meetings. Thomas, Robert's lawyer, was sharp and efficient. He handled the transfer of ownership with ruthless precision. The case was airtight. David and Michael, facing potential criminal charges for fraud, settled quickly. They relinquished all claims to the company. They were left with nothing. I became the sole owner, and I immediately sold it to Apex Global. The money, an astronomical sum that I couldn't even comprehend, was deposited into my account. I was one of the wealthiest men in the city. It felt surreal and empty. I paid off the mortgage on my house. I fixed the leaky roof and the creaky stairs, but the house still felt too big, too full of memories, too full of ghosts. Emily and David tried to contact me. They sent letters, emails, voicemails. Apologies mixed with justification. Pleas for forgiveness mixed with subtle hints about their financial struggles. Michael had left Emily. The divorce was messy, Public. Their wealthy friends had abandoned them. They were broke, their reputations ruined. They were pariahs in the world they had tried so hard to impress. I read the letters, but I never responded. The trust was broken. The bond was severed. They hadn't apologized for hurting me. They apologized for getting caught. They apologized because they needed something from me. Again, one afternoon, I was sitting on my porch, sanding a piece of walnut wood. Planning to build a new table? The smell of the wood was comforting. Familiar, real. Robert Vance stopped by. He often did, checking in on me. We had become real friends, bound by a shared understanding of the world, a shared respect for integrity. "What are you building, Arthur?" he asked, smiling. "A new beginning," I replied. I told him about my plan. I'd set up a foundation in Mary's name, the Mary Harrison Foundation, dedicated to funding trade schools, providing scholarships for young people who wanted to learn a craft, who wanted to work with their hands. I donated almost all the money to the foundation. I kept enough to live comfortably, but I didn't want the wealth that had poisoned my children. I didn't want the millions. I just wanted peace. Robert nodded, his eyes shining with approval. "That's a legacy worthy of you, Arthur. Solid, enduring, built to last." I am an old man now. My hands are still rough. My suit is still worn. I live a simple life, but I am not poor. I am rich in ways my children may never understand. Sometimes I think back to that night, the humiliation, the pain, the glittering chandeliers, and I remember Mary's words, "Integrity, Arthur. That's the only wealth that truly matters." I lost my family, but I found myself. I found my dignity, and as I sit on my porch, watching the sunset, I know that I am rich in the only way that counts. I have my integrity, and that is a foundation that can never be broken. Thanks for listening. Please rate our story in the comments. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe. Your support means a lot, because your time matters.